Good morning, everyone. Today we delve into a moment that would forever change aerial combat, the dawn of the American Thunderbolt in the skies over occupied France. It's April the 8th, 1943, and high above the rugged landscape of Caen, a strategic point within Nazi-controlled territory, a clash of titanic forces is unfolding at 27,000 feet. On one side, experienced German pilots like Oberleutnant Ralph Hermeken, smirking at the sight of what they dismissively call milk bottles, the massive, unwieldy American fighters. On the other, the seemingly clumsy but deadly new weapon system, an aircraft that, in just a year and a half, would overturn the rules of the game. But here's where it gets truly shocking. Why did the Thunderbolt, initially mocked for its size and awkward appearance, become a nightmare for the Luftwaffe? Could a machine that looked like a flying greenhouse with oversized propellers truly dominate the skies? And what is the real story behind those monstrous 8 machine guns loaded with over 3,000 rounds each, capable of firing 6,000 rounds per minute, enough to obliterate entire formations in seconds? How did a design born out of panic in June of 1940, crafted by a man who called it a dinosaur with good proportions, turn into a weapon that would redefine aerial warfare forever? All these pieces form part of one colossal question. Is the Thunderbolt really the most powerful fighter of its era? Or was its reputation built on hype and fear-mongering? And what secrets did this aircraft hide? Secrets that could have changed the course of the war itself. In this video, we will trace its origins from a desperate U.S. military need to the monstrous prototype that first took to the skies on May the 6th, 1941. We'll uncover how this dinosaur, initially dismissed as unwieldy, became an unstoppable force of industrial might, wielding firepower capable of turning the tide of air battles. Prepare to see beyond the headlines and understand the true story behind the legendary P-47 Thunderbolt, one that promises to shock and challenge everything you thought you knew about World War II aerial combat. The most intense chapter begins right now. On the morning of April the 8th, in the year of 1943, high above the rugged landscape of Caen, a place within occupied France, approximately 27,000 feet into the stratosphere, a vivid scene of anticipation and nascent conflict was unfolding. Oberleutnant Ralph Hermeken, a seasoned German fighter pilot and an ace from the region of Yakutsvada, couldn't entirely suppress a sly, almost mischievous grin even through the tight confines of his oxygen mask. His gaze was fixed on the approaching formation of enemy aircraft emerging from the glow of the clear, crisp canopy of his Focke-Wulf F-190A5. As these unfamiliar silhouettes struggled laboriously against the thin, frigid air to gain altitude, Hermeken, with veteran's insight, watched the progression of the American fighters making their first true combat appearance over occupied European territory. Despite their energetic effort to ascend, these incoming aircraft, the mighty Republic P-47 Thunderbolts, appeared almost comical to him, a sight that tickled his military sense, revealing a stark contrast to the sleek lines and agile fighters he was more accustomed to. Hermeken's contagious amusement found its way into his radio transmission, where he joked to his wingman with a breadbasket analogy, remarking, "These Allied armies have been sent flying with nothing more than milk bottles," a humorous dig at the vast, somewhat ungainly size of the Thunderbolts, which, despite their heft, posed a severe threat. Below the ascending giants, a row of 16 P-47C Thunderbolts of the 4th Fighter Group tramped upward in disciplined, tight formation, their power plants, formidable Pratt & Whitney R2800 double WASP engines capable of producing 2,000 horsepower each, straining against their substantial 7-ton frames. To the sharply contrasting German pilots, conditioned by an environment where popular fighters like the sleek Supermarine Spitfire and the nimble Soviet MiGs mostly ruled, these American fighters appeared, in comparison, wobbly, even overweight giants, cartoonishly barrel-shaped, topped with expansive greenhouse canopies that gleamed in the morning sun. Their wings, seemingly undersized given the mammoth fuselages, appeared as awkward appendages, and the abundant propellers awkwardly dwarfed the ensemble, making these flying milk bottles, as some dismiss them, seem almost inelegant. Yet all the German pilots circling above, indeed all those 1,000 and more feet below and around the formation, could not have foreseen the true significance of what they were witnessing. They did not realize that they were gazing upon the harbingers of a new weapon system, one that, within a relatively short span, just a year and a half, would revolutionize aerial combat and inexorably dismantle the German Luftwaffe's frontline fighter units. This seemingly clumsy and oppressive aircraft, initially met with mockery and disbelief by many, would evolve into a terror-inducing force, a symbol of American industrial might. The Thunderbolts, with their formidable armament, 8 machine guns firing tens of thousands of rounds, specifically over 3,400 rounds loaded into each aircraft, with a blistering combined rate of fire of around 6,000 rounds per minute, possessed a raw, devastating capacity to destroy anything in their sights. Their broad wings, unlike the sleek, optimized interceptors favored by Germans and Soviets, carried this overwhelming firepower, enough to massacre entire formations in less than a couple of seconds. The story of what happened began subtly on that April morning when Major Donald Bully, commanding the heroic 335th Fighter Squadron, observed the German formation carefully maneuvering with malicious intent, preparing to descend and attack. A former veteran of the Eagle Squadron, having recently transitioned from the Royal Air Force's Spitfires into the rugged, heavily armed Thunderbolt, Bailey understood, despite the crowd of seemingly inexperienced pilots under his command, that conventional air combat tactics designed for lighter fighters wouldn't suffice with this revolutionary machine. The Thunderbolt, a radical departure from the traditional fighter's narrow design, wasn't built simply to outrun or outmaneuver. It was engineered for mass, raw power, and lethal firepower, visualizing a new era, one where victory would favor industrial efficiency over the finesse and intuitiveness of traditional tactics. In that moment, among the 56 American pilots, each born from a different storm of experience, there were men destined to become legends, fabled aces whose names would echo through history and strike fear into the heart of the Luftwaffe's ranks. Yet on this particular day, April 8, 1943, these young men were largely novices, pilot and machine alike, facing the most committed and seasoned fighter force the Germans could muster. The Axis forces, hardened by years of continuous combat since 1939, fighting against Polish, French, British, and Russian adversaries, carried with them a wealth of combat experience. Conversely, in the ever-evolving theater of aerial combat during the early years of World War II, a remarkable transformation took place where the elements of capacity and resilience converged to create an aircraft with an overwhelming advantage. The once scenic laughter of German pilots, confident in their mastery, would soon be replaced by a rising wave of terror once they fully faced the destructive potential of the synchronized Browning machine guns mounted on this formidable machine. These guns, firing in precise unison, could annihilate an enemy aircraft from a distance of approximately 400 yards, transforming the sky into a lethal grid. This evolution culminated in the development of the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, a marvel born out of a moment of national panic in June of 1940, when the need for an effective high-altitude interceptor grew urgent. As German fighters launched rapid assaults across France, Alexander Cartway, a distinguished chief designer at Republic Aviation, born in the land of Georgia, was tasked with high-stakes specifications from the United States Army Air Corps. The goal was clear: create a machine capable of matching the prowess of the Luftwaffe's best fighters, particularly at high altitudes where combat was most critical. In response, Cartway and his team embarked on an ambitious project, designing not just an advanced aircraft, but what most would later call a very literal monster, a marvel that redefined what was thought possible in aerial engineering. Cartway boldly acknowledged the beast they were forging, telling his design team, "It will be a dinosaur, no doubt about it, but with a confident addition, a dinosaur with good proportions." Their creation, designated the XP-47B prototype, first took to the skies on the 6th of May in the year 1941, sending shock waves through all who witnessed its maiden flight. This aircraft's silhouette contrasted sharply with previous fighters. At an empty weight of nearly 9,900 pounds, it surpassed its predecessor, the P-43 Lancer, by approximately 65%. Its colossal turbo supercharger system, with complex ductwork channeling exhaust through the rear fuselage, gave the Thunderbolt an almost grotesque, gravid appearance, prompting initial apprehension amongst test pilots approaching it for the first time. Many asked the very logical question, does this thing actually fly? Not only did the P-47 Thunderbolt fly, but it displayed capabilities unlike any other aircraft of its era. Its prowess at high altitude was particularly extraordinary, thanks in large part to the Pratt & Whitney R2800 radial engine, an 18-cylinder double wasp, which churned out an impressive 2,000 horsepower. This power plant could sustain full throttle at altitudes reaching 27,000 feet, an altitude where German fighters struggled merely to breathe. The turbo supercharger, activated by exhaust gases, provided performance at sea-level conditions even when soaring high in the thin stratospheric air, where conventional superchargers faltered. Initially, however, not everyone was an immediate admirer of the aircraft, especially not Major Hubert "Hub" ZK, who commanded the 56th Fighter Group training at Bridgeport, Connecticut. His initial impressions leaned towards harsh criticism. The unit, over the course of several months, from September of 1942 through January of 1943, lost 18 pilots and 41 aircraft in training accidents involving this new type of aircraft. The P-47 proved to be a difficult tool to master. It often ground-looped during landings, torque-rolled during takeoffs, and temperamentally dove with such ferocity that pilots encountered dangerous compressibility effects, shock waves forming across its wings that froze controls and threatened lives. Yet those pilots who persisted through these early struggles discovered that beneath its challenging exterior lay something truly extraordinary, a machine that, with skillful handling, could unlock abilities previously thought unimaginable. One such pilot was Lieutenant Robert Johnson, a humble farm boy from Oklahoma, who would later become one of America's top flying aces with a tally of 27 aerial victories. Johnson vividly recalled his first flight in the Thunderbolt as akin to being strapped to a runaway locomotive, winded and overwhelmingly powerful, but awe-inspiring. His words painted a picture of a machine whose raw power was nearly frightening, a beast that you aimed with deliberate precision rather than trying to finesse like more nimble fighters. The initial combat encounters in the spring months of 1943 served to confirm the prevailing biases regarding this aircraft's handling characteristics. The Germans flying the infamous Focke-Wulf FW-190s and Messerschmitt Bf-10-9S quickly realized that the Thunderbolt's formidable weight and size were significant disadvantages in turning agility, and its high-altitude climb performance was limited compared to the lighter, more nimble German fighters. As a result, Luftwaffe pilots developed tactical approaches to exploit these weaknesses. Attacking from below proved especially effective, as the heavy Thunderbolt struggled to respond swiftly, and in maneuvering dogfights, where agility often decided the outcome, the Germans held the advantage. One such German pilot, Hohr. During the early stages of the aerial combat during the Second World War, a highly charged narrative was unfolding, revealing the evolving perceptions and realities faced by Allied pilots, particularly the Americans, in their confrontation with German fighters. The German Luftwaffe, confident in their aircraft and tactics, often regarded the American fighters as unwieldy and underperforming, describing them dismissively as oversized targets in the skies, implying that they were easy marks rather than formidable opponents. This confidence was seemingly supported by the initial statistics, which painted a discouraging picture for American aircrews. In just their first month of operational flights, American fighter groups lost 14 of their rugged but often maligned Thunderbolt aircraft, while only securing 3 confirmed kills against German counterparts. Meanwhile, the Royal Air Force, which observed these early skirmishes with stealthy reserve from their own Spitfire squadrons, subtly hinted that perhaps the Americans had chosen the wrong type of aircraft for their missions, suggesting that the formidable-looking P-47 Thunderbolt might not be the best choice for aerial battlefield dominance. British pilots, known for their sharp wit and irreverent humor, often joke that the most effective evasive maneuver in a P-47 was to unfasten your parachute straps and simply run around inside the cockpit, as the aircraft's extensive and roomy cockpit was so generously sized that it even made escaping a cumbersome task. though this was clearly said in jest. Despite such doubts and humorous remarks, certain strange phenomena began to emerge from these early encounters that German military intelligence did not fully comprehend. Strikingly, the P-47 fighters that were shot down in combat had endured astonishing damage before succumbing to enemy fire. One such aircraft, after a combat mission on the 4th of May, returned riddled with over 21 holes from cannon fire and bearing over 100 hits from machine guns. Damages dignified enough to obliterate any of the lighter or more subtly built fighters, like the Messerschmitt or the Spitfire. One particularly remarkable aspect of the P-47's durability was its massive radial engine, which by design lacked the vulnerable coolant systems found in liquid-cooled fighters. This meant that the engine could absorb hits that would have been enough to incapacitate or destroy other aircraft. Its resilience in the face of fierce barrage was merely one part of a story of surprising toughness. But what was truly turning the tide of German perceptions, even more so than the aircraft's hardy construction, was the devastating firepower it could deliver once its guns were brought to bear. When American Thunderbolts finally aligned their guns with enemy targets, the results were nothing short of catastrophic, erupting into scenes of destruction that German pilots had never encountered before. Unlike earlier fighters of the war, which were equipped with rifle-caliber guns or limited ammunition cannon, the P-47 possessed the ability to sustain destructive fire continuously for durations exceeding 30 seconds, an almost unthinkable span of time in the brutal and fast-paced arena of aerial combat. The turning point that marked a profound shift in the perception of the P-47 and, more broadly, the capabilities of American fighters occurred on the 26th of June, in the year 1943, over the skies of Lazo, France. This event involved Second Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson of the 61st Fighter Squadron. His encounter, which would soon swell into legendary status among both Allied and Axis airmen, unfolded during a routine escort mission that was suddenly interrupted by a fierce engagement. Johnson's formation, composed of 48 Thunderbolts on patrol after completing their escort duties, was unexpectedly attacked by a squadron of 16 Focke-Wulf 9190 fighters flying in two groups under the command of Headman Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, brother of the famously renowned German ace, Adolf Galland. The Germans executed their attack flawlessly, diving from the bright sunlight overhead with extraordinary speed and tactical precision, aiming to surprise and overwhelm the American formation. Caught at the very rear of the formation, Johnson's aircraft was immediately subjected to a relentless cannon and machine gun crossfire. It was in these furious seconds of combat that the true mettle of the P-47 was revealed. His aircraft was blasted by 21mm shells, which exploded so violently across the toughness of the Thunderbolt that there was little hope for survival. The canopy was shattered into fragments, and hydraulic fluid sprayed out into the cockpit's interior, impairing Johnson's ability to control the fighter. The engine cowling was torn away, exposing the engine to the elements, and flames ignited behind the instrument panel, threatening to engulf the entire aircraft. Despite these catastrophic damages, Johnson himself was wounded, suffering shrapnel and bullet fragments that injured his nose and leg, and attempted many times to eject from the plane, only to discover that the cockpit canopy had become jammed. An exploding 20mm shell had fused the canopy track shut, leaving him trapped inside a dying aircraft at about 27,000 feet of altitude. What transp? During a fierce air combat encounter, a P-47 Thunderbolt, flown by a pilot identified only as 2/JG-26, was seen limping toward the channel at a slow, battered speed of less than 170 miles per hour. Despite the passage of many years, aviation historians have yet to definitively identify this brave pilot, although several names have been put forth based on detailed German combat reports documented on that very day. What unfolded afterward became one of the most extraordinary and memorable episodes in the entire history of aerial warfare. In the midst of this perilous scene, a German fighter pilot managed to position himself directly behind the damaged Thunderbolt. Without hesitation, he unleashed a devastating barrage with his formidable 82mm cannon, along with two 13mm machine guns. The struggling American aircraft's crew could do little but brace themselves behind their armored armor plate and hope for survival amid the hail of fire. The P-47 took the full force of the cannon's ammunition load, which was completely expended in this fierce exchange. The German pilot then moved into a new position, firing again, this time only with his machine guns, hoping to finish off the resistant aircraft. When its cannon ammunition had run out, the German fighter line pulled alongside the battered Thunderbolt, peering in disbelief at what was essentially a flying wreck. The American pilot had a clear view of his opponent's face, a young blond man whose confident expression gradually changed, shifting from confident bravado to confusion, and finally to what appeared to be a flicker of genuine fear. The German aircraft then repositioned once more, emptying its remaining gun magazines into the crippled Thunderbolt. Remarkably, despite this relentless barrage, the battered aircraft continued to fly. The German pilot, clearly stunned, drew close again, shook his head in apparent amazement at the resilience before him, and even gave a casual, informal salute before pulling away. It was likely out of ammunition at this point. Meanwhile, the American P-47 was forced to make an emergency landing at Manston Airfield, where its engine failed during the final approach. Once on the ground, the crew chief stopped counting bullet holes after reaching the number of 200. One of the cannon shells exploded just inches from Johnson's head, while another blast detonated against the armor plate behind his seat. The engine bore the brunt of the assault, suffering direct hits. The control cables had been partially severed, and 3 out of 4 main fuselage longerons, the structural backbone providing strength and rigidity, had been shot through. Despite these appalling damages, the aircraft had miraculously brought its pilot back alive. The resilience of Johnson's aircraft shook the entire aviation community. The damage inflicted on the P-47 communicated a stark message. Perhaps even America's most robust fighter plane was underestimated. The wreckage also caused surprise and skepticism among German intelligence officers, who initially refused to believe the reports from the second section of the German fighter unit, JG-26, questioning how any aircraft could survive such levels of punishment. However, multiple pilot testimonies confirmed the seemingly impossible feat. The Thunderbolt had endured all the weaponry the Luftwaffe's top fighters could throw at it and still survived. By the middle of July in 1943, American pilots had begun to fully understand and exploit the true strengths of the P-47 Thunderbolt. Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zena, commander of the 56 Fighter Group, had learned through brutal trial and error that the key was in using the aircraft's weight and power to their advantage. His advice was clear: avoid turning sharply with enemy fighters. Do not attempt to climb to higher altitudes at low speed. Instead, wield the brute force of the aircraft itself. Use your weight, your engine's power, and your guns to your advantage. The Thunderbolt's considerable mass, initially viewed as a disadvantage, ultimately became its greatest weapon. In the context of a dive, the P-47's incredible mass meant that it could reach breathtaking speeds, up to 550 miles per hour from an altitude of 30,000 feet, far surpassing the capabilities of any German fighter. Even in a vertical dive, no enemy aircraft could match this velocity. That speed, once achieved, could be converted into altitude through a tactic known as the zoom climb. This maneuver left pursuing fighters helplessly behind, unable to keep up with the rapidly gaining altitude. Captain Walker Bard Mahurin, who would go on to become one of the earliest American aces in the European theater, pioneered what would be called the boom and zoom tactic. This innovative combat approach, sometimes informally known among pilots as the Thunderbolt turkey shoot, involved diving on an enemy, firing, then climbing swiftly away again to re-engage. Instead of engaging in prolonged dogfights, American P-47 pilots learned to utilize their aircraft's speed and durability to strike quickly and retreat before the enemy could respond effectively. This method transformed the P-47 into an incredibly effective tool of aerial combat, turning its perceived disadvantages during the intense and often brutal dogfights that characterized aerial combat in World War II. The American P-47 Thunderbolt fighters displayed remarkable tactical advantages that often turned the tide of battle. When operating in formation, these aircraft would ascend to altitudes reaching 30,000 feet, soaring well above the operational range of most German fighters. This altitude advantage meant that German pilots found it increasingly difficult to engage effectively once the American squadrons reached their cruising height. Integrated into their combat strategy, the Thunderbolt formations would then execute daring maneuvers. Immediately upon spotting Luftwaffe fighters below, The P-47s would roll upside down into an inverted position before plunging downward in a steep dive. In doing so, they would accelerate to tremendous speeds that made precise deflection shooting nearly impossible for the defending Germans. The mere act of pitching into such a dive enhanced their velocity, enabling them to close the gap rapidly and strike with devastating force. As these aircraft hurtled toward the ground at incredible speeds, their heavy machine guns unleashed relentless firepower upon targets below. At the lowest point of their dive, the American fighters would deliver a merciless barrage that spoke volume through its deafening roar. German pilots who managed to survive these onslaughts vividly described facing what they called a wall of lead, an immense, almost impenetrable curtain of bullets that blanketed the enemy in a lethal storm. This synchronized, converging fire from multiple aircraft created what could only be described as an indomitable zone of destruction, where the combined volume of bullets effectively rendered the fight over almost instantaneously. Aircraft caught within this critical convergence zone didn't merely fall out of the sky, they disintegrated into pieces. The intensity and precision of American firepower ensured that once an enemy entered this deadly intersection, a rapid and total destruction was inevitable. Fighter planes withering in this metallurgical assault would burst apart, their structures shredding into fragments as their wings, fuselage, and tail sections were pummeled into ruin. The scene was akin to a violent, mechanical demolition, a swift obliteration leaving no hope for survival. The sheer destructive potential of American aircraft was most starkly demonstrated during a particular mission on August the 17th, in the year of 1943. This operation involved two simultaneous raids targeting the German aerodromes at Schweinfurt and Regensburg, two of the most ambitious penetrations into German territory attempted up to that point in the war. Such deep infiltration missions were daunting and risky, but also served as profound tests of the P-47 Thunderbolt's capabilities. This operation proved both the limits and the terrifying effectiveness of the Thunderbolts. Despite their formidable firepower and the added range provided by drop tanks, the attack revealed that these aircraft were not invincible. Nonetheless, when used skillfully, the P-47's destructive capacity was staggering. Led by Major David Schilling and his squadron of the 62nd Fighter Squadron, the attack on the German Messerschmitt 110 fighters was meticulously executed. These twin-engine aircraft, heavily armed with cannons and rockets, were specifically designed to hunt and destroy bombers like the B-17 Flying Fortress, making them a dangerous adversary for any fighter group. Schilling's squadron executed a dive from 30,000 feet, streaming down on the enemy formation with alarming speed and precision. A survivor of one of the German Messerschmitt 100s and 10s, Gunner Heinrich Roth of a twin-engine fighter, later recounted in the interrogation room what he witnessed during the assault. Roth described the American fighters as coming down like hammers from heaven. He vividly recalled opening fire at roughly 450 meters, hitting their mark with oppressive accuracy. Roth observed how the strike shattered the enemy aircraft. The wing was torn apart, the aircraft disintegrated before their eyes. He vividly remembered watching one of the American fighters launch its attack. The targeted enemy simply exploded. Were it not for the debris and burning wreckage that followed, it appeared as if the aircraft had been blown to smithereens. With the wings quickly separated from the fuselage, the tail section torn away, and the entire crew compartment turned into metallic confetti. In a matter of mere seconds, what once was a formidable Messerschmitt 110 was reduced to nothing more than scattered wreckage on the landscape below. Remarkably, within less than a minute, the assault completely annihilated a total of 8 Messerschmitt 100s and 10 110s. Such a feat was unprecedented, leaving the German pilots with a sense of shock and disbelief, as they had never experienced such concentrated and overwhelming firepower arrayed against them. Each of the P-47 aircraft was heavily armed, sporting 4 guns equipped with well over 425 rounds precisely per barrel, totaling about 3,400 rounds per fighter, with a combined weight approaching nearly 900 pounds of ammunition on board each aircraft. This vast amount of ammunition was particularly significant when considering the tactical advantages it conferred. When the aircraft converged as research and combat experience continued to unfold, A troubling new reality about the P-47 Thunderbolt came to light, revealing a remarkable and somewhat unexpected aspect of its performance. In stark contrast to its sluggishness at lower altitudes, the P-47's capabilities soared dramatically as it gained altitude. While German fighters struggled and often found themselves at a disadvantage against this American heavy fighter, the ship's turbocharged engine played a crucial role in this evolving dynamic. This engine, a double wasp with turbo supercharging, maintained its maximum rated power output up to an incredible height of approximately 30,000 feet, a feat that gave the P-47 a significant operational edge compared to many adversaries. German fighters relying exclusively on single-stage or two-stage mechanical superchargers experienced considerable performance declines as they ascended beyond 25,000 feet. Their engines, incapable of matching the turbocharged system's efficiency at higher altitudes, would often sputter and lose power, leaving German pilots feeling increasingly helpless in the thin and challenging mountain air. One of the most tragic illustrations of this was the fate of Hans Philipp, a legendary German ace credited with over 206 victories, a man whose skill and experience made him one of the Luftwaffe's most formidable pilots. Yet even such an accomplished aviator was not immune to this new reality. On the 8th of October in the year 1943, Philipp encountered the deadly truths of this technological disparity firsthand. Leading a formation of Jagdwache fighters, specialized German interceptors, against a formation of B-17 flying fortresses at about 28,000 feet over the location of Bremen, Philipp found himself and his aircraft, a Focke-Wulf FW-190A6, in a dire situation. The engine, a BMW 801, which performed admirably at medium altitudes, was struggling desperately in the rarefied atmosphere. The aircraft became sluggish and unresponsive, hampered by the lack of available oxygen as they ascended far above the Earth's surface, almost 6 miles up, where the air was so thin that even a powerhouse of an engine was gasping for breath and struggling to produce its rated power. Meanwhile, the P-47s belonging to the 60th 5th Fighter Group, with their vastly superior altitude performance, descended swiftly from 32,000 feet to engage Philipp's formation. Their dive was masterful, and they presented almost helpless targets for the American fighters. Robert Johnson, a pilot who had amassed considerable combat experience and was rapidly approaching the status of an ace, was flying at about 31,000 feet when he first spotted Philipp's distinctive aircraft, the Focke-Wulf, with its intricate nose art and unique markings. His reconnaissance was precise and collected. He quickly prepared to engage. According to his combat report, he opened fire from a distance of approximately 300 yards, with his guns aimed at a 30-degree deflection, an angle that tested his aiming skills to their limit. His observations confirmed multiple strikes along the entire length of the German aircraft's fuselage. Soon after, the enemy aircraft ignited in a fiery explosion, disintegrating into debris in midair. There was no indication that Philipp managed to eject or parachute to safety before his aircraft was torn apart. The death of Hans Philipp sent shockwaves through the German Luftwaffe, or Air Wraith, as it was sometimes colloquially called, shaking the confidence of even the most seasoned pilots. Philipp's death was especially poignant because he was widely regarded as one of Germany's most successful and experienced aces, having survived more than 500 combat missions spanning both the Eastern and Western fronts. His loss prompted urgent concern within the high command. If such a skilled and seasoned fighter pilot could be dispatched with relative ease by a relatively new American fighter, then what chance did the average German pilot realistically have against the relentless and technologically superior Thunderbolts? This incident prompted the German High Command to initiate an immediate and comprehensive investigation into the P-47's true capabilities and technological advantages. The resulting report, which was presented to the Reich Marshal Hermann Göring in November of 1943, was nearly sobering to the point of being disconcerting. The data revealed that the P-47's service ceiling, the maximum altitude at which it could sustain controlled flight, exceeded an astonishing 42,000 feet, heights well beyond the reach of any German fighter of the era, which generally struggled to climb above 25,000 feet. Additionally, the P-47's dive speed nearing the speed of sound was another disturbing metric for the Germans to consider, as it underscored the nearly unmatched acceleration and high-speed potential of the American aircraft. The P-47's armor protection was equally formidable. It featured a thick 3/8-inch steel plate positioned directly behind the pilot's seat, designed to absorb rearward impacts and battlefield debris. Its windscreen was reinforced with half-inch thick bulletproof glass, capable of resisting incoming projectiles, and the fighter's vital components were protected further by. As the conversation near Hanover unfolded, the usual confidence we carried into the skies was tested in a dramatic fashion. We anticipated our inherent advantage would hold, allowing us to maneuver freely amid the chaotic dance of combat. However, the enemy suddenly veered their aircraft directly towards us, and, in an aggressive display of tactics, they executed a sharp climb, which brought them to our altitude with startling precision and speed. Despite our efforts to break away, they maintainably pressed close behind, matching our ascent and following us up to an altitude of 30,000 feet, a remarkable feat in itself. In this deadly pursuit, Schmidt's aircraft was caught in a sudden burst of attack, and was utterly destroyed. The explosion was so intense that nothing remained but a billow of smoke and the scattering of metal fragments, a stark reminder of how much the battlefield had changed from the days when such machines once evoked nothing but laughter among us. Those aircraft are no longer the same, redesigned and rearmed for the brutal new reality of war. The upgrade offering a significant leap was the introduction of paddle blade propellers, which did far more than simply enhance acceleration or climb rate. This modification altered not only the aircraft's performance, but also its auditory signature. The usual thunderous roar of our Thunderbolt now carried a sharper, more menacing edge, as the tips of the paddle blades clipped through the air at supersonic speeds, producing a distinct and ear-shattering sound wave. This deafening noise, which could be heard from miles away, became a signature warning to the enemy. The German ground troops, acutely aware of the sound's lethal implications, began to identify approaching fortresses by their ominous, thunderous rumble alone, and gave it one of their own nicknames, Donnerschlag Thunderclap, a half-derisive, half-fearful moniker that underscored the dread-inspiring presence of these aircraft. By the early months of 2044, the P-47's capabilities had been significantly extended. When fitted with external fuel tanks, these fighters could accompany bombers on deep into enemy territory, even across the formidable defenses of Central Europe. Typically, these aircraft carried two wing-mounted tanks with a combined volume of approximately 216 gallons, or a large belly tank holding about 75 gallons, which collectively extended their range to over 1,000 miles. The paddle blade propellers made this extended range even more effective because, regardless of whether the aircraft was fully loaded or running on internal fuel, the new prop design allowed for improved efficiency. As a result, Thunderbolts were capable of engaging in combat immediately after jettisoning their extra fuel, maintaining combat effectiveness and speed with remarkable reliability. The German Luftwaffe, facing this rising threat, responded strategically by concentrating their efforts on the bombers, hoping that targeting these high-value assets would result in enough losses to halt the American daylight bombing campaigns. Yet such tactics made flying through the protective escort of P-fortresses an increasingly perilous maneuver, for the fighters quickly proved they were willing to risk everything to guard their charges. Over time, German pilots developed a grudging respect for these behemoth fighters that bordered on genuine fear. Few among their ranks could forget encounters like that of Major G.A. Rau, among Germany's most accomplished aces, with a tally of over 275 aerial victories, most amassed on the Eastern Front, who survived a fierce dogfight with P-47 fighters on the 6th of March, once in 1944. It was a battle that left him badly wounded, but alive. Later in a post-war interview, he recalled the encounter vividly. "We saw them overhead, massive silhouettes against the bright sun. Someone in the squadron made light of them, calling them the flying pigs, but no one was laughing even half a minute later. The moment they descended upon us, it was like an avalanche, faster than our reactions could match. Their initial pass wiped out 3 of our fighters, just obliterated, reduced to flaming debris. Unlike us, their guns didn't shoot in quick bursts. They poured out relentless, solid streams of gunfire. When you stumbled into one of those deadly streams, instant death followed. Another key advantage of these aircraft, often overlooked, was their endurance. The Germans, using fighters with more limited fuel capacity, pushed their engines to the brink, operating at full throttle and consuming fuel rapidly. In contrast, the big American radials in the P-47, and similarly in the P-51 Mustangs, could cruise at high altitudes with remarkable efficiency, thanks to their powerful but economical engines. These aircraft could remain effectively manned alongside the bombers for hours on end, rotating in and out of cover as the mission progressed while maintaining sufficient fuel reserves for a safe return. Approaching spring of 1944, as the number of P-51 Mustangs increased and gradually replaced some of the P-47s in providing long-range escort, the Thunderbolt units, the size of a typical military truck, is well known. But what really revolutionized the formidable P-47 Thunderbolt was the strategic addition of bombs and rockets, which transformed it from a robust fighter into a versatile, multi-role war machine capable of devastating ground targets with remarkable precision. The earliest version, designated the D-25, was already formidable, being able to carry an impressive payload of two 1,000-pound bombs mounted beneath each wing, complemented by an additional 500-pound bomb strapped beneath the fuselage. This bomb load was quite comparable to that of some intermediate-sized medium bombers used earlier in the war, making the P-47 an exceptional platform for ground attack missions. As the war progressed, later variants of the Thunderbolt saw further enhancements, including the integration of zero-length rocket stub pylons. These pylons could hold 10 high-velocity aircraft rockets, each equivalent in destructive power to a 105mm artillery shell, significantly boosting the aircraft's destructive capability against entrenched targets or convoys. The addition of rockets turned the P-47 into a flying artillery piece, capable of hitting targets from a distance with sniper-like accuracy, effectively laying down a hail of destruction on enemy formations with each pass. One vivid account of the P-47's imposing effectiveness comes from Oberst Hans von Luck, who commanded the 125th Panzer Grenadier Regiment during the Normandy campaign. Von Luck experienced firsthand the terrifying close-quarters ground assault capabilities of these aircraft, describing how they swooped in from low altitudes so close that the pilot's expressions could be made out, heightening the sense of immediacy and danger. The deafening roar of the engines, the screaming start of the rockets, and the thunderous barrage of their heavy machine guns created a symphony of destruction that left no doubt about the aircraft's lethal efficiency. In a single vicious pass, 20 of their trucks could be reduced to smoldering wreckage, utterly obliterated in moments. The psychological impact on the surviving troops was profound. The Thunderbolt was not just a weapon of destruction, but a symbol of the overwhelming power the Allies wielded over their enemies. They called these aircraft Jabos, a nickname derived from their role as fighter bombers. However, in reality, the Thunderbolt was far more than that, an almost mythical hybrid of flying artillery and precision strike capabilities, with a sniper's accuracy that sowed chaos and fear among the Axis forces. By June the 6th of the year, 1444, the significance of air power had become clearly undeniable to the Germans. On that historic D-Day, more than 500 P-47 Thunderbolts provided critical air cover for the invasion forces, forming an impenetrable aerial shield hovering ominously over the beaches where Allied troops were landing. German fighters daring enough to approach the landing zones met immediate and fierce resistance, with many being shot down before reaching their targets. Oberleutnant Wolfgang Fischer of the unit, known as Jagdgeschwader, was among a handful of German pilots to have attempted a direct sortie against the Allied invasion fleet that day. Fischer later recounted that the skies had entirely belonged to the Americans. It was an aerial dominance so complete that at all altitudes, from ground level to 30,000 feet, the Thunderbolts showcased their supremacy. Fischer described how the P-47s waited patiently from dawn onward, their fighters forming a deadly wall in every echelon, making it impossible for Germans to climb over or dive beneath them. Their guns, precise, relentless, turned German fighters into a cascade of aluminum debris and fire, raining down in extinguishing torrents. In the crucial weeks following D-Day, the P-47 Thunderbolt's role in shaping the air war grew ever more prominent. During daylight hours, these aircraft systematically undertook the destruction of German logistical and military movement, crippling their ability to reinforce and resupply, a maneuver critical to ensuring the success of the Allied push inland. The raw figures achieved during the month of June typify this dominance. 9 Ninth Air Force Thunderbolts claimed the destruction of approximately 651 locomotives, close to 3,847 trucks, over 512 tanks and armored vehicles, and more than 4,550 trotting or horse-drawn vehicles. These staggering numbers not only highlight the extraordinary impact of the Thunderbolt, but also illustrate how entirely the German army was forced to adapt. Moving only under the cover of darkness, their ability to respond quickly and respond effectively was severely hampered. While the Germans desperately tried to counter the overwhelming presence and firepower of the Thunderbolt, all their efforts proved largely ineffective. They fortified vehicle armor, increased the deployment and density of anti-aircraft gun positions, and experimented with new camouflage techniques. Yet nothing could fully negate the P-47's formidable combination of speed, armor protection, and firepower, qualities that made these aircraft nearly unstoppable in combat. Even the feared German 88mm anti-aircraft guns, renowned for their destructive capacity, the honor of facing American fighters, renowned for their resilience and firepower, was often met with surprise by the Japanese. Having become accustomed to engaging nimble yet relatively fragile American aircraft, the Japanese underestimated the formidable capabilities of the P-47 Thunderbolt. This aircraft combined raw firepower with a remarkable robustness that rendered many Japanese attacks ineffective. One of Japan's most skilled and notable pilots, Saburo Sakai, who had many encounters with P-47s over New Guinea, later recounted his experiences with awe and a measure of dread. He famously described the P-47s as monsters, emphasizing their ability to absorb tremendous amounts of punishment. Sakai pointed out how their own 20mm cannons, which could easily shred a P-40 fighter with only a few hits, often seemed powerless when faced with a Thunderbolt. He detailed an instance in which he put dozens of rounds into a single P-47, only to see it fly away seemingly unfazed. The return fire from these aircraft was equally terrifying, streams of heavy, destructive bullets tearing through their targets and causing severe damage to even the most resilient Japanese fighters. The formidable nature of the P-47 was undeniable, especially considering its legendary durability in combat. The evolution of the P-47 did not stop with its initial form. A significant variant, the P-47N, was meticulously developed for the Pacific theater, featuring structural modifications to enhance its operational range and combat effectiveness in the vast expanses of the Pacific. This model was equipped with wet wings capable of holding up to 93 gallons of fuel each, vastly extending the aircraft's range to approximately 2,350 miles. These modifications transformed the Thunderbolt into a true long-range escort fighter capable of accompanying B-29 superfortresses all the way to Japan. It was a decisive step in the aircraft's development, illustrating how the original short-legged fighter of 1943 had grown into a capable, extended-range weapon by the end of the war, capable of strategic reach across the Pacific. Moreover, the accomplishments of the P-47 extended beyond conventional dogfights. Perhaps the most compelling evidence of its adaptability and effectiveness came in its encounters with the cutting-edge jet fighters of Nazi Germany. The Messerschmitt Me 262, with a top speed of approximately 540 miles per hour, was theoretically untouchable by piston-driven fighters like the Thunderbolt. Nonetheless, seasoned Thunderbolt pilots discovered tactical opportunities to catch and engage these jet aircraft. They learned that during critical phases, such as takeoff and landing, moments when jets were most vulnerable, and during high-speed dives from high altitudes, the P-47 could confront the faster opponents effectively. One of the most remarkable moments came on November 27, 1944, when Lieutenant Colonel John C. Muir of the 352nd Fighter Group succeeded in shooting down a Me-262 with a P-47. Flying from an altitude of close to 28,000 feet, Muir's Thunderbird reached speeds of nearly 500 miles per hour in a dive, fast enough to close the distance with the jet in level flight. The German pilot, confident in the superiority of his aircraft's top speed, failed to notice the closing Thunderbolt until the moment Mir's guns opened fire at a mere 400 yards. In his combat report, Mir described the aftermath. The enemy aircraft disintegrated rapidly under sustained fire. Large sections, including both engines, separated from the fuselage, and there was no chance for the jet's pilot to escape. The concentrated firepower of the 8,500 caliber guns, in this case, proved more than enough to overpower the late-war German jets, surprising even their defenders with its effectiveness. By early 1945, the United States had intensified its countermeasures against German jets and V-1 flying bombs by deploying specially modified versions of the P-47, such as the P-47M. These aircraft were heavily upgraded with a water methanol injection system, which boosted their power output to around 2,800 horsepower. Thanks to refined aerodynamics and enhanced engine performance, the P-47M could reach level speeds of approximately 470 miles per hour at 30,000 feet, allowing them to intercept fast-moving jets under certain tactical circumstances. These modifications were a testament to the aircraft's adaptability and the ongoing technological innovations to ensure dominance in the skies. One example of the outstanding effectiveness of these modified Thunderbolts was Major George Bostwick of the 63rd Fighter Squadron, who achieved victories over German jets in March of 1945. Bostwick's tactical approach focused more on exceptional firepower than sheer speed. His report emphasized that, although jets were faster, they lacked maneuverability and resilience. He observed that a single well-placed burst from his aircraft's weapons could disable or destroy jets as easily as if they were made of paper. The German fighters had to slow down in order to attack large enemy bombers, and during these moments of vulnerability, American pilots could strike back with deadly precision. The ultimate demonstration under the expansive sky, a formidable formation of 22 Thunderbolt fighters stood firmly grounded, ready for their next sortie alongside a contingent of several other aircraft. Amid this armada, a captured German pilot was brought into the command post, his face bearing a hint of cocky bravado as he pointed dramatically at the blazing remnants of a recently destroyed American aircraft, then taunted with a sharp edge in his voice, "What do you think of that?" His words carried a challenge, a sneer meant to provoke a reaction. The response from Major George Brooking was swift and became etched into the history of the 9th Air Force as a testament to American resilience and resourcefulness. With a calm, confident demeanor, he directed the pilot's gaze toward the bustling flight line where ground crews worked tirelessly, shuffling aside the wreckage of damaged planes and swiftly preparing sturdy, hard stands for the incoming replacements. "By tomorrow," Brooking announced with certainty, "we'll have 40 new aircraft ready." Then he paused before delivering a pointed question that cut through any of the enemy's supposed superiority. "How long will it take you to replace your pilots?" The smirk on the German pilot's face vanished, replaced by a moment of uncomfortable silence, a silent acknowledgement of the daunting might of American wartime production and pilot training. Within just 48 hours, the hangars and flight line were brimming with Avian's four-pointers, freshly assembled Fort Bull Gimkatus 44s, flown in from depots across the Atlantic in Britain. The Luftwaffe, which had suffered a staggering loss of 271 aircraft and a total of 213 pilots during the Battle of Boden-Platter, many of whom were seasoned instructors and seasoned leaders, found itself hard-pressed to recover as these precious personnel and their expertise could never truly be replaced. Meanwhile, the Americans experienced a relatively lighter blow, losing only 134 aircraft across all their attacked airfields during this campaign. Yet they swiftly replenished their fleet within a week, maintaining the steady flow of their overwhelming production. The raw numbers laid bare the underlying story of a gradual but inescapable defeat for the Axis powers, who faced an unrelenting industrial might. During the war, the aircraft manufacturer Republic Aviation produced a staggering 15,683 P-47 Thunderbolts, a figure that outstripped the output of any other American fighter aircraft. At the peak of production, the factory located in Farmingdale on Long Island operated relentlessly, churning out one Thunderbolt fighter every single hour, 24 hours a day, every day of the week. Across the country, at the Evansville plant in Indiana, built anew from open farmland in the year 1942, the pace was equally remarkable. By 1944, the factory was manufacturing 500 aircraft each month. The sheer complexity of each P-47D model was enveloped in meticulous engineering. Each fighter contained 65,000 individual parts, with 8 miles of electrical wiring snaking through its frame, 2,000 pounds of aluminum, and an additional 300 pounds of rubber components. The engine alone was a marvel of precision, composed of 2,400 separate machine components, all crafted to tolerances of just 1,000th of an inch. The assembly of such sophisticated machinery was carried out by American workers, many of whom were women. Many had arrived straight from civilian life, some having never seen an aircraft before the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, yet they assembled these complex machines with a level of accuracy and skill that exceeded own peacetime standards, ensuring the effectiveness and reliability of each fighter. Matching the production of aircraft was the astonishing rate at which ammunition was supplied and prepared. For every sortie, a P-47 would require around 3,400 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition, and in the heat of combat, this number was regularly exceeded as numerous Thunderbolt fighters soared into the skies on daily missions. By the middle of 1944, the consumption of rounds had surpassed 10 million bullets each month in the European theater alone. In Missouri, the Lake City Arsenal, one of multiple ammunition manufacturing plants, produced a prodigious 30 million rounds every month, with each cartridge machined to exact tolerances measured in 10,000ths of an inch, guaranteeing flawless feeding through the synchronized gun systems. The fuel demands of the Thunderbolt were similarly immense. During a typical flight, a single fighter consumed around 100 gallons of gasoline per hour in normal operation, with this figure rising up to 300 gallons in combat situations when water injection was employed to boost performance. By late 1944, the 9th Air Force alone was reliant on over 25 million gallons of aviation fuel each month to sustain its operations. All this fuel, ammunition, and aircraft components were transported across the Atlantic, delivered by tanker ships, products of American mass production in their own right, ensuring the relentless supply chain was never disrupted. Yet perhaps the most impressive feat of American wartime effort lay in, during the period leading up to and throughout World War II, the American Air Forces underwent a remarkable transformation through intensive training programs that emphasized not only the mastery of raw flying skills, but also the intricacies of combat tactics, technical proficiency, and weapon deployment. This training regimen included sophisticated instruction in formation flying, where pilots learned to operate in tight coordinated groups, instrument navigation, which proved vital during adverse weather or night missions, gunnery accuracy, and tactical maneuvers designed to outsmart enemy defenses. A significant part of their preparedness involved rigorous practice against captured German aircraft, an approach that granted American pilots first-hand knowledge of their adversaries' technology and operational procedures. By studying and simulating combat against these enemy planes, they gained invaluable insights into German capabilities and limitations, which in turn shaped their strategic approach during missions. Moreover, American pilots became intimately familiar with the systems and technical aspects of their aircraft, often studying detailed manuals that German pilots, who were typically denied access to such documents, never saw. This technical literacy not only increased pilots' confidence, but also allowed them to utilize their aircraft's full potential with precision and efficiency in combat situations. One noteworthy example illustrating the advantage that this extensive training bestowed upon American pilots was Lieutenant Eugene Roberts, who arrived in England during September of 1944. Despite having flown only around 420 hours in total, with about 75 of those hours specifically logged in the formidable P-47 Thunderbolt, Roberts approached combat with a nearly unparalleled level of prepared proficiency. His training included firing practices at towed targets, honing his skills in deflection shooting, predicting where a moving target would be by the time bullets arrived, and studying gun camera footage from actual combat encounters. Thanks to this thorough preparation, Roberts knew exactly what to do on his very first mission. Contrastingly, the German pilots faced a different reality. With considerably less training, fewer resources, and often inadequate technical knowledge, They were at a substantial disadvantage. The disparity was stark. The American pilots' experience dwarfed that of their adversaries, making any encounter an uneven contest, what could be called an outright imbalance of preparation and skill. The result was far from being a fair fight for the Germans. By the beginning of March in the year 1945, the German Luftwaffe's strength was largely a shadow of its former self, maintained mostly on paper. Key problems included acute fuel shortages that had grounded the majority of aircraft, rendering them useless at a critical time. The seasoned pilots, once considered a formidable force, were either killed in action or had been captured. The remaining airfields, once bustling hubs of activity, had been reduced to cratered ruin, evidence of relentless Allied bombing campaigns. Yet even in this dire situation, the existential challenge for German pilots remained survival against the overwhelming might of Allied air power, a struggle complicated further by an impossible equation they faced. Engaging the enemy meant confronting American forces flying in formidable formations of P-47 Thunderbolts, aircraft that virtually dominated the airspace from ground level all the way up to 30,800 feet. These formations were well-trained, with American pilots exploiting the altitude advantage to execute complex tactics, making successful attacks extremely difficult for German defenses. Feldwebel Klaus Brechender, one of the last German pilots trained in mid-1945, recounted that he had participated in a single combat sortie before the war's end. During this brief encounter over Leipzig, he encountered 4 Thunderbolts in perfect formation, diving swiftly from above. Despite his efforts to evade their assault, their speed and coordination made escape impossible. Brechender recalled attempting to turn his aircraft, but the speed of the American fighters was overwhelming. The leader broke formation and fired from about 500 meters, causing his plane to shake violently as if struck by a sledgehammer. The engine suddenly exploded and his wing tore free. He barely managed to eject in time. From his parachute, he watched in despair as the American fighters systematically destroyed his entire squadron. In less than a minute, the sky was filled with burning metal and debris, bodies torn apart in a hellish cascade of destruction. The psychological impact was profound, leaving remaining German pilots demoralized and psychologically scarred. This trauma, compounded by the relentless material superiority of the American forces, who could produce aircraft at a rate that exceeded German losses, drove home the stark reality of defeat. The Americans' ability to sustain an unending supply of aircraft, ammunition, and spare parts outpaced the Germans' dwindling resources, rendering victory an unattainable goal. In this context, the German force, once a powerful aerial combat opponent, had become diminished to little more than a paper tiger by April of the same year. The aerial fleet was grounded by fuel shortages, and the remaining pilots were predominantly inexperienced or exhausted veterans whose skills could no longer compensate for organizational and material deficiencies. The tenacity of the German effort against the immense American industrial capacity proved futile. Even if planes and fuel had been available, these officers referred to the illness as jabot fever, a malady manifested by psychological and physical symptoms that intensified precisely when reports of thunderbolts, mighty thunderstorms, began to cascade across the battlefield. Interestingly, veterans who, in earlier battles, had faced ferocious Spitfires and Hurricanes, birds of flight known for their agility and speed, without showing any fear, now found themselves becoming physically ill with recognizable stress symptoms just moments before engaging in combat with P-47 Thunderbolts. The unmistakable roar of approaching thunderstorms, sometimes accompanied by lightning, generated panic among the troops on the ground, who instinctively understood that survival in these moments hinged on the quick and effective pursuit of cover to shield themselves from the impending danger. Their fear was compounded by the sensory impact of the thunder, which seemed to echo with a sinister significance, signaling the arrival of the formidable Thunderbolt fighters overhead. When reviewing the final comprehensive statistics of P-47 Thunderbolt operations, one encounters numbers that are genuinely staggering and difficult to fully grasp. In the European theater alone, Allied forces claimed the destruction of over 3,752 German aircraft through aerial combat engagements. Additionally, German planes were annihilated on the ground in an estimated 3,315 instances. The destruction extended beyond aircraft. Over 86,000 railway cars were destroyed, a strategic blow to enemy logistics. Almost 9,000 locomotives were also taken out, crippling their ability to move supplies and troops efficiently. The ground campaign resulted in the destruction of around 6,000 armored fighting vehicles, tanks, assault guns, and other heavily armed vehicles, undermining the German armored resistance. Furthermore, more than 68,000 trucks and around 60,000 horse-drawn vehicles were brought to ruin in the Pacific campaign, disrupting supply lines and troop movements across vast distances. The tally of enemy aircraft lost to the American forces was equally significant. In total, approximately 697 Japanese aircraft went down in aerial combat. On the ground, about 150 Japanese planes were destroyed, disrupting their air deployment severely. The destruction extended to transport and mechanized units as well. About 1,500 vehicles and around 150 locomotives were wrecked, alongside countless barges, ships, and strategic installations that supported Japanese military efforts. Focusing specifically on the 9th Air Force, which was primarily equipped with a robust and versatile P-47 Thunderbolt, the operational claims are truly impressive. During the course of the war, this force executed in excess of 213,873 combat sorties, missions flown into enemy territory to attack, scout, and defend. These sorties resulted in the dropping of approximately 120,000 tons of bombs, an overwhelming destructive capacity aimed at impairing the enemy's infrastructure and military capacity. The Thunderbolt units fired around 135 million rounds of ammunition, an immense volume of firepower, while simultaneously launching about 60,000 rockets, which added a potent punch to their offensive capabilities. Throughout these operations, the Thunderbolt units boasted a remarkable kill ratio of roughly 4.6 to 1 in aerial combat, illustrating their superior effectiveness against enemy aircraft. At the same time, they maintained the lowest loss rate of any Allied fighter bomber. That is, they managed to inflict heavy damage with relatively minimal casualties among their pilots and aircraft, a testament to their resilience and the skill of their crews. Beneath these formidable numbers lay a significant human toll. The German Luftwaffe, Nazi Germany's aerial force, suffered the loss of approximately 28,000 pilots killed in combat against Western Allied forces. Many of these pilots met their end under intense and concentrated fire from American heavy machine guns, which proved highly effective in aerial dogfights. Every one of these losses represented several years' worth of rigorous pilot training, an investment that Germany could never afford to replace once lost. By the time the war drew to a close, the typical German fighter pilot had flown fewer than 30 hours of combat experience. In stark contrast, the average American pilot flying the P-47 had accumulated over 200 hours of combat flying, providing a significant advantage in skill and survivability. At the Luftwaffe Interrogation Center in Oberursel, where captured Allied pilots were systematically debriefed by German intelligence, detailed records from the year 1945 offered insights into how German evaluations of Allied aircraft evolved over the course of the conflict. The documentation reflected a complete reversal of earlier opinions. Initially, in April of 1943, the P-47 Thunderbird was considered a large, somewhat unwieldy aircraft, lacking maneuverability and inferior to German fighters in most performance categories, except for its dive speed. German assessments at that time also noted that its machine gun armor was inadequate when faced with fighters armed with cannons. The overall threat that the P-47 posed was seen as minimal. By December of 1943, however, perceptions shifted dramatically. Reports highlighted the aircraft's exceptional performance at high altitudes, gaining recognition for its structural strength and resilience. While in reflecting on the course of aerial warfare and the evolution of combat aircraft, one cannot help but acknowledge a profound mistake made back in 1943. During that turbulent year, we observed a particular airplane, large, heavy, and unmistakably formidable. And in a moment of ill-considered amusement, we dismissed it with a laugh. We mused that the Americans lacked understanding of air combat. We believed they had constructed a bomber and mistakenly labeled it a fighter. However, with the clarity of hindsight, it becomes painfully evident that it was we who failed to comprehend the true nature of modern aerial combat. The United States, instead of trying to replicate European fighters, focused on building an aircraft tailored to their specific wartime goals. An aircraft designed around the principles of mass production, overwhelming firepower, and resilience in battle. The Americans recognized that in a prolonged war of attrition, victory would favor the aircraft capable of absorbing punishment while unleashing devastating firepower upon enemies and staying operational for extended periods. They understood this concept core to victory's blueprint, and as history reveals, they were ultimately correct. My first experience after the war with a captured P-47 Thunderbolt left an indelible impression. Stepping into that aircraft, I was immediately struck by its incredible power, which seemed to defy gravity. It climbed with an almost seemingly effortless ascent, as if it was falling upward. The cockpit itself was remarkably comfortable, providing the pilot with a sense of purpose and control. Visibility was excellent, ensuring the pilot could read the battlefield with clarity, while the controls felt precise and responsive, almost as if they had been crafted for a skilled hand. The P-47 was essentially a pilot's aircraft, built for efficiency, confidence, and durability, encased in a thick layer of armor that offered protection against the fiercest enemy fire. Yet what lodged itself most deeply in my memory was the realization that America had produced over 15,000 of these sophisticated, powerful machines amidst the chaos of fighting a war that spanned two mighty oceans. Each P-47 was powered by an engine more complex and advanced than anything Germany had managed to develop. Despite the complexity, they managed to produce these aircraft at a pace that surpassed our ability to manufacture simpler fighters. This achievement underscored an unfortunate truth. Our position in the conflict was, in many respects, hopeless. One sound in particular remains etched in my mind, a relentless, formidable noise, which many called Roosevelt's piano because of the distinctive sound of its guns. Once you heard that unmistakable rattle and roar, it was an auditory signature that one never forgot. Tragically, for many of my friends, that sound marked their final moments in combat. The P-47 was not just a machine that defeated the German Luftwaffe, it practically annihilated it in the air. Its impact on the air war was decisive and all-encompassing. It was a weapon that tipped the scales in favor of the Allies. The design of the P-47 exemplified the American industrial ethos to perfection. It was a product of brute force engineering, focused on raw power and durability, backed by an almost unlimited pool of resources. Every single component, from the wings to the fuselage, was overbuilt, overpowered, and over-engineered. The wing spars alone could support loads of up to 40,000 pounds, 3 times the aircraft's own maximum loaded weight, guaranteeing remarkable structural integrity even under the most extreme conditions. The mounting points for the engine were engineered to withstand forces of 12G, providing a margin of safety that could handle intense maneuvers. The control cables ran in doubled sets throughout the aircraft with automatic backup systems, ensuring reliable handling in every combat situation. The ammunition feed system was nothing short of a marvel in engineering. It comprised 8 separate magazines, each capable of holding set 4 125 rounds, feeding those rounds through electrically powered systems designed to prevent jamming during various maneuvers. Even during the most hectic dogfights, the guns were heated electrically to prevent freezing at high altitudes, a crucial feature that maintained operation even in freezing cold conditions. Each of the aircraft's guns had its own charging mechanism and could be individually synchronized for precise aiming, allowing pilots to customize their fire for optimal effectiveness. The convergence of the weapons, meaning the point where the bullets of all guns met, was adjustable from 150 yards to 400 yards. This flexibility meant a pilot could set the guns to perform best at their preferred engagement range, whether for close combat or at a longer distance. Even after the conflict ended, some German veterans maintained that the P-47's victory was primarily a matter of numbers, not necessarily superior individual aircraft, asserting that German fighters, while technically more advanced, were overwhelmed by the sheer volume of American planes. However, the combat records tell a different story. In battles where numbers were roughly equal, the P-47s consistently outperformed their opponents. The heavy machine guns, long dismissed as inferior to cannons in terms of destructive power, demonstrated their true worth. The formidable P-47 Thunderbolt, often regarded as an icon of American engineering prowess during World War II, stood out not only for its incredible durability, but also for its groundbreaking firepower and design. One of its most notable features was its extensive arsenal of 50-caliber armor-piercing incendiary rounds, which were equipped with a sophisticated delayed-action fuse mechanism. This ingenious system ensured that the shells would penetrate their targets before detonating, maximizing damage and battlefield effectiveness. The incendiary elements inside these rounds could burn at an astonishing 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, a heat intense enough to ignite even the most resilient materials, including aluminum structures commonly found in aircraft frames. Unlike the lighter but sometimes more erratic, German 20mm shells, though heavier in weight, they often detonated upon surface contact. These explosions produced spectacular bursts of flame and shrapnel, capable of causing significant damage, but frequently only superficial or surface-level harm due to their explosive timing and impact dynamics. The P-47 Thunderbolt remains the heaviest single-engine piston fighter aircraft ever fielded in mass production. Its immense weight, when empty at around 10,000 pounds, surpassed the total combat weight of some twin-engine fighters, demonstrating the aircraft's sturdy build and formidable presence in the sky. Powerful enough to produce more raw thrust than entire formations of bombers from earlier conflicts, the engine of the P-47 generated a staggering amount of horsepower, more than enough to make it a true flying battering ram. Its formidable array of weaponry, the 8 synchronized, 50-caliber machine guns, delivered an unprecedented volume of firepower, rivaling the firepower of an entire infantry squadron. Despite this arsenal, the Thunderbolt was astonishingly under the control of young pilots, often mere teenagers fresh out of high school, who flew these behemoths across war-torn skies. Maintenance crews who learned their craft in a matter of weeks under the intense pressures of combat conditions kept these aircraft operational. In a remarkably short span of less than 2 years, the transformation in how German combatants viewed the P-47 was nothing short of dramatic. What had begun as mockery and skepticism quickly morphed into terror and respect, as the seemingly ungainly aircraft proved lethal and relentless. During that period, the P-47, affectionately dubbed the flying milk bottle for its stout and bulky shape, emerged as the most feared aircraft in the Luftwaffe's arsenal. Veteran pilots who bravely faced and flew against skilled fighters like the Spitfire, Hurricane, and the Soviet Yak-9, machines they regarded with respect, began to speak of the Thunderbolt in hushed tones, even decades after the war's end. Its reputation, built on ferocity and resilience, lingered long in the memories of those who fought. Today at the United States Air Force Museum located in Dayton, Ohio, a meticulously restored P-47D is displayed among other legendary fighter aircraft of the era. Its informational placard lists technical specifications and several battle honors earned throughout the war. Yet the true story of this aircraft is vividly narrated by a small display case adjacent to it. Inside, visitors can find spent 50-caliber shells, remnants of the immense firepower that rained down from the Thunderbolt, and a strip of gun camera film capturing the moment a Focke-Wulf 190 disintegrates gracefully under a hail of bullets. Beneath this evocative display, a quote taken from an interrogative report of a German pilot in the year 1945 captures the essence of the aircraft's reputation. "We laughed when we first saw them. A fat, ugly American fighter that couldn't turn, climb, or fight. Our laughter died quickly, however, when we realized that they didn't need to turn or climb. They simply pointed their guns at us, and we ceased to exist." Sormehi. The German pilot's words reflect the profound shock and fear that gripped Luftwaffe pilots once they recognized the true power of the P-47. The aircraft's evolution from a subject of ridicule to an instrument of near-absolute destruction encapsulates a remarkable transformation. When it first entered service in April of 1943, many German pilots dismissed the Thunderbolt as an ungainly and unremarkable machine. Yet by the time the war drew to a close in May of 1945, no German pilots remained to make such dismissive remarks. The skies had become an arena dominated by the roar of the Thunderbolt. This mighty aircraft, with its coordinated armament of 8 Browning machine guns, meticulously synchronized to fire through the propeller arc, had fundamentally rewritten the rules of aerial combat. Its effectiveness in bringing down enemy aircraft and its ability to withstand immense damage without catastrophe had buried the Luftwaffe under an avalanche of lead, reshaping the aerial battlefield. In April of the year 1943, German pilots had observed this seemingly awkward American fighter from afar, often laughing at what they perceived as its lack of agility or speed. But by May of 1945,